In recent times, more attention has been given to the brutalities faced by Black African slaves, shedding light on the dehumanizing treatment that Black men and women endured during the era of slavery. People have learned of the unspeakable horrors, how Black male slaves were treated as less than human, chained, and forced to work on plantations. Those who resisted or fell short of their forced labor expectations were often mutilated, with their arms or legs being severed as punishment and warning to others. For Black women, the nightmare was even more horrifying. In addition to being forced into hard labor, they were often sexually abused, treated as mere breeding machines to fuel the slave economy. Their world was a constant cycle of exploitation and violence. But amidst the growing awareness of these atrocities, one group has often been overlooked: Black slave children. History books rarely focus on the stories of enslaved children or the unimaginable hardships they faced. Yet, their pain was no less severe. In this video, we aim to bring to light the forgotten stories of these children, whose lives were marked by unimaginable suffering, deprivation, and the worst forms of degradation. According to the Black History Archives, children were often seen as less valuable compared to adult slaves because they were not considered fully productive laborers. As a result, they were given smaller rations, often leaving them malnourished and weak. These children were denied the joys of childhood, forced into a world where survival was a daily struggle. Whether working in the fields or as servants in the master's house, they were treated as commodities, their futures shaped by a system built on cruelty. The story of Black slave children is one of pain and hardship, but also of resilience and survival. Their experiences deserve to be remembered, honored, and shared, so that we can fully understand the extent of the horrors of slavery and the strength it took to survive them. While slave masters had a vested interest in the survival of enslaved children as future workers and assets, there was a constant tension between the delayed economic benefits of their future labor and the immediate costs of their care. This delicate balance often determined how slave children were treated. Unlike many societies involved in the transatlantic slave trade, which relied heavily on the continuous importation of native Africans to replenish their labor force, the United States developed a distinct system of slavery based on the natural reproduction of the enslaved population. By the time the transatlantic slave trade was officially abolished in the U.S. in 1808, fewer than 1 million slaves had been imported into the country. After 1807, when illicit trading became rampant, the majority of trafficked individuals were children, revealing the grim reality of how valuable young lives had become in maintaining the system of forced labor. What followed was a staggering population boom among the enslaved. By 1860, the enslaved population had reached 3.9 million, with a significant 56% of this group being under the age of 20. This statistic reveals the immense number of enslaved children who were born into and grew up within the brutal confines of the American slave system. The forced breeding of enslaved women to increase the enslaved population within the United States became an institutionalized practice, further emphasizing how the system viewed human beings as mere commodities. These children, born into slavery, were raised in an environment of extreme deprivation, stripped of any semblance of childhood or freedom, and forced into labor at an early age. The slaveholders' interest in them was purely economic, but these children's stories are also ones of resilience, and it is crucial to remember their experiences as we reflect on this dark chapter of history. Slave children were seen as valuable assets by their masters and the broader society, primarily due to their future potential as laborers and their monetary value within the system. While it might seem logical to protect and nurture these young lives for economic reasons, the reality was far more brutal. The living conditions and care slave children received were often determined solely by the will of their masters, leaving their well-being at the mercy of arbitrary decisions. The experiences of enslaved children varied greatly, but many accounts reveal a harsh existence, where childhood was overshadowed by labor. Some children recounted being put to work as soon as they could walk, spending their formative years performing continuous and grueling tasks on plantations. From an early age, Enslaved children were thrust into a system that saw them not as children, but as future tools for production. Raising these children was often not the responsibility of their biological parents alone, but shared by the entire slave community. Mothers, after giving birth, were typically expected to return to work shortly, and the responsibility of caring for the infants fell to the very young or elderly slaves who were not deemed fit for hard labor. This meant there were often many children to care for with little supervision, and the task of looking after the youngest of the enslaved fell to those least equipped to provide adequate care. The conditions under which slave children lived and were fed were equally dehumanizing. Sparse provisions led to competition and quarrels over meager meals, and in some instances, the situation was so dire that black slave children were reported to have been fed like livestock. These cruel practices highlight the stark contrast between their perceived value as future laborers and the reality of how they were treated. Their childhood was stripped away, replaced by a life of hardship, deprivation, and brutality that underscored their role as mere commodities within the slave system. Despite these harsh realities, the story of slave children is not just one of oppression, but also of survival. The strength and resilience of these children, growing up in such hostile environments, is a powerful testament to the human spirit and the will to endure. The food provided to enslaved children was often referred to as potliker, a simple vegetable-based broth that lacked the necessary nutrients for proper development. As a result, malnutrition was common, leading to the heartbreaking sight of shiny bodies, plump bellies, and glistening ribs, clear signs of the poor diet they endured. Clothing for these children was just as basic, consisting of simple smock-like garments worn by both boys and girls. Since slave children were not considered major contributors to labor, their clothing was never a priority. It was not uncommon to see children running around naked on plantations, and when clothing was torn or lost, it was rarely replaced. As children grew older and began taking on more labor-intensive roles, boys might receive trousers and a shirt, while girls were typically given dresses. Shoes were rare and, when available, often took the form of homemade moccasin-style footwear. The conditions in which these children lived were equally dismal. Slave quarters varied widely from plantation to plantation, with visitors describing them as cramped huts, hovels, or sometimes romanticizing them as cottages. In reality, these quarters were poorly furnished and lacked basic amenities, creating an environment of hardship and deprivation. Traditional family structures were often not possible for enslaved children, due to the lack of recognition of slave marriages and family ties. Children were frequently separated from their parents and placed with other adults. This severing of familial bonds added another layer of trauma to their already challenging existence. The labor performed by enslaved children was the fundamental reason for their enslavement. Although the age at which children were put to work varied from one plantation to another, most owners preferred to introduce labor gradually. In some cases, toddlers were reported to be working in the fields alongside their mothers, while on other plantations, children might not begin their forced labor until they were older. However, by age 21, it was certain that every enslaved child had been fully absorbed into the brutal system of plantation work. Before we continue, we'd like to take a moment to ask for your support. If you're finding this video insightful, please subscribe to our channel and give the video a like. Your support helps us create more content like this, and together, we can build a strong community that values learning and truth. Let's dive back into the history now. The tasks assigned to younger enslaved children were not typically based on gender, and many were given a variety of duties to perform. These included fetching water for the fields, tending to animals in the gardens, performing kitchen and household chores, and even caring for younger children. Some boys, starting at a very young age, were allowed to learn trades such as blacksmithing or carpentry, giving them specific skills that would later be exploited by their owners. However, no matter the task, the ever-present fear of being sold, or the mere threat of it, loomed large in the lives of children born into slavery. For these children, the possibility of being torn away from their families was a constant source of anxiety. While some states eventually enacted laws to prevent the sale of children under the age of 10 away from their families, such protections were far from universal. It was not uncommon for children to be sold alongside their mothers, particularly when a master passed away and his possessions, including enslaved people, were divided among his heirs. This practice turned human lives into mere objects of inheritance, deepening the trauma for families already living under oppressive conditions. In the early years of slavery, and less frequently in later periods, children who were designated for sale were often paraded naked on the auction block. Prospective buyers would scrutinize them with cold calculation, evaluating their physical attributes and potential future labor value. The dehumanization that children experienced at such a young age is difficult to comprehend, but it was a brutal reality for many. Stripped of dignity, separated from their families, and sold as property, these children endured unimaginable suffering within a system designed to crush their spirit and erase their humanity. As we reflect on these painful histories, it is essential to remember the resilience of those who endured. Despite being subjected to such cruelty, enslaved children, like their parents, found ways to survive and hold on to hope. Their stories remind us of the strength it takes to overcome immense adversity and the importance of acknowledging the full scope of slavery's impact. On the auction block, potential buyers would examine every detail of an enslaved child's body, from their teeth to their bones, searching for any sign of weakness or abnormality that might lower their value. No enslaved person, not even children, ever had the luxury of feeling secure. At any moment, on the whim of their master, they could be uprooted, sold, and separated from their families without any form of recourse. The constant threat of being torn away from their loved ones hung over them like a shadow, making their childhoods filled with fear and uncertainty. However, the experiences of enslaved children cannot be generalized. Their lives varied significantly depending on a variety of factors, including the period, location, and type of labor they were forced into. For instance, enslaved children working on sugar or rice plantations endured some of the most grueling physical labor imaginable, often in extreme heat and harsh conditions. In contrast, those on tobacco plantations might have faced slightly less physically demanding tasks, though the weight of their oppression was no less heavy. It's important to note that many of the hardships endured by these children, and all enslaved people, were symptoms of a system that had outlived its time. As one observer of the period insightfully commented, slavery not only frustrated the desires and abilities of black people, but it also perverted the whites who upheld it. This twisted system corrupted everyone it touched, leaving a legacy of pain and degradation. And when slavery finally vanished, it was not mourned for long. The damage it inflicted, however, lingered, especially in the lives of enslaved children who had been shaped by years of cruelty and exploitation. For slave children, the most trying trials often lay ahead. Growing up under these conditions meant that the transition from childhood to adulthood was marked by relentless hardship and uncertainty. Their resilience in the face of such an inhumane system is a testament to the enduring strength of the human spirit. As we continue to learn about their stories, it's essential to recognize that the end of slavery did not erase the suffering they endured. Instead, it left a legacy that continues to affect generations. In the world of slavery, childhood was fleeting and the burden of labor began at a tender age. No matter the labor arrangement, enslaved children were thrust into adult roles long before they had the chance to truly be children. Mingo White, a former slave from Franklin County, Alabama, vividly recalled his experiences as a young boy, providing a haunting glimpse into the reality of life for enslaved children. He recounted, "I wasn't nothing but a child, but I had to work the same as any man. I went to the field and hoed cotton, pulled fodder, and picked cotton with the rest of my hands. In the winter, I went to the woods with the men folks to get wood or sap from the trees to make turpentine and tar. We made charcoal to run the blacksmith shop with. I also helped my mammy with her work." Mingo's memories paint a stark picture of a childhood where the line between child and adult was blurred by the demands of survival. His tasks were not limited to the fields. He also participated in collecting wood, making turpentine, and producing charcoal, laborious activities typically associated with adult men. Yet, Mingo, like countless other enslaved children, was expected to perform these duties alongside the adults, with no consideration for his youth or physical limitations. In addition to his own grueling work, Mingo assisted his mother, whose workload was overwhelming for any one person. As he recalled, her task was too hard for any one person. She had to serve as a maid to Mr. Whitestar, cook for all the hands, spin and carve 4 cuts of thread a day, 144 threads to the cut, and then wash. The relentless cycle of labor extended beyond the fields and into the homes of enslaved families, where even the most basic domestic tasks became a shared responsibility. Mingo's mother, like many enslaved women, was expected to fulfill multiple roles, from cooking and cleaning to spinning thread, all while raising her own children, often with little or no help. For enslaved children, the responsibilities they bore were immense. In addition to laboring in the fields and workshops, they were often tasked with caring for younger children, further illustrating how quickly they were forced into adult roles. This early introduction to the brutal realities of slavery left them with little time to experience the innocence and freedom of childhood. Their lives were marked by constant work, and their value was determined by their ability to contribute to the plantation's productivity, no matter their age or physical capabilities. Mingo White's testimony offers a poignant reminder of the harsh realities enslaved children faced, showing how their childhoods were stripped away by the oppressive demands of the slave system. In a world where even the youngest were expected to labor alongside men and women, there was little room for tenderness or protection. These children were not spared from the cruelty of the system. Instead, they were woven into its fabric, forced to grow up long before their time. Enslaved children, despite their tender age, were not exempt from labor. They were often assigned roles that both served the plantation's operations and reinforced their subservient position in the social hierarchy. Mary Bell from Missouri had a rather unique task, recalling, "They put me on a pony at mealtime to ride out to the field and call the hands to dinner." Meanwhile, William Hudson, during his interview in Tulsa, Oklahoma, shared that as a young boy, he was tasked with carrying a little black bag when his owner went to doctoring folks. These small jobs, whether for entertainment or practical purposes, served as early lessons in obedience and the hierarchy that dominated Southern society, whether purchased or raised on the plantation. Enslaved children were given duties designed to prepare them for a lifetime of servitude. Plantation owners often stationed young boys and girls at gates, instructing them to open and close them for white family members and guests, a constant reminder of their role as servants. Girls typically served women and their daughters, while boys tended to the needs of men and their sons. These tasks ranged from fetching shoes and desserts to carrying mail from town, reinforcing the idea that their primary purpose was to serve others. Lula Holmes Williams, though smaller than the child she cared for, became a companion to Miss Lucy, her owner's daughter. Lula was held accountable for Lucy's well-being, ensuring that she wore her bonnet outdoors. This responsibility extended to all members of the White family, including the overseer and his wife, highlighting the intimate yet deeply unequal relationships between enslaved children and the families they served. Yet there was another darker side to these stories. The tragic tale of young Harriet, an enslaved girl who met her untimely death in James M. Torbert's well on August 30th, 1855, serves as a somber reminder of the extreme hardships enslaved children endured. Harriet was just 4 years, 3 months, and 3 days old when she passed away, forced into labor far beyond her capacity. In his farm journal, Torbert documented the heartbreaking loss, writing, "She was 4 years, 3 months, and 3 days old. Anthony comes to the plantation after me. I came home, made a coffin, and buried my little Negro. I am sorry my little Negro is dead, but I can't help it." These cold words reflect the deeply ingrained dehumanization of enslaved people, where even a child's death was reduced to a mere matter of business. Harriet's tragedy was not the only one Torbert confronted that year. In July, he had also crafted a coffin for another enslaved child, Arthur, who belonged to Torbert's father. Arthur's death, like Harriet's, was recorded with similar detachment, showing how commonplace these losses were in the lives of enslaved families. Infant and child mortality rates among the enslaved population were shockingly high, particularly in the coastal rice-growing regions where conditions were even more grueling. Black infants born into slavery died at twice the rate of white infants, and even those who survived infancy faced a higher mortality rate than their white counterparts. The harsh conditions of slavery, from malnutrition to relentless labor, meant that enslaved children were born into an inevitable struggle for survival, a war they were often destined to lose. Despite these tragic losses, plantation policies aimed at ensuring children survived, even at the cost of short-term profits, held additional benefits for the slaveholders. A healthy child was a future laborer, and though many children succumbed to the brutal conditions of slavery, those who survived were seen as valuable assets to their masters. According to the owners, slaves who were raised on their home plantations from an early age tended to be more loyal and obedient than those purchased at auction. Plantation owners who witnessed the strong bond between owners and slaves believed that those who were born and raised in the master's house, or who were longtime family members, saw the owner as a father, and that the connection would last a lifetime. However, it is hard to believe that this would happen, as no father would force his children to work on a plantation in the worst conditions. If black slave children did not perform their duties, they were punished just like adult slaves. The reason the mortality rate of black slave children was so high was because they were mistreated and punished when they could not work, resulting in their deaths. Black slaves were forced to have children as young as 13 years old. They were forced to mate with other adult black slaves on breeding farms so that they could raise more children for additional labor duties. The institution of slavery ensured that slave children were completely destroyed in their childhood and made into mental slaves. They knew that if they did not do as they were told, they could be whipped, tortured, or killed. They also knew that no one could hold their masters responsible for the murders of their masters because they had no rights. They were just objects to be played with and sometimes abused or killed by their masters. Did you know that black child slaves had to go through this? Isn't it true that they grew up in chains and slavery, knowing that their childhood and their whole life would be wasted? Tell us your thoughts in the comments below. Do you want to make more videos? If so, please subscribe and support us by clicking the bell icon. You can also see other videos on our channel.